If you think the scariest thing is getting robbed, that means you've never had bears in your house. It had been a long, exhausting day. The kind that makes you want to collapse the second you walk through the door. I worked a double shift at the warehouse, and my only plan for the night was to grab a beer, order some takeout, and pass out in front of the TV. But the second I stepped into my apartment, all thoughts of relaxation vanished. The place was wrecked. Not just messy, not just untidy, completely demolished. The trash can was overturned, its contents scattered across the kitchen floor. The couch cushions were shredded, the stuffing bursting out like white clouds. My fridge door was wide open, food containers torn apart, their contents smeared across the countertops. The entire apartment smelled like fur, sweat, something wild and thick in the air that made my skin prickle. For a second, my exhausted brain couldn't process what I was seeing. My first thought, I got robbed. Some junkie had broken in, ransacked the place, looking for cash or electronics. I reached for my phone, fingers trembling as I prepared to call the cops. Then I heard it, a low, deep rumble. A growl came from the kitchen. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. The air in the room thickened, the kind of thick that makes you feel like you can't breathe properly. I turned my head slowly, step by step, until I could see the source of the sound. A bear. A massive, brown, furry beast was standing in front of my fridge, its head buried deep inside, snorting and grunting as it rummaged through my groceries. And it wasn't alone. Two smaller bears, cubs, were climbing over my kitchen counters, knocking things over, sniffing at empty pizza boxes. One of them was on my dining table, pawing at a bag of chips like a curious puppy. My stomach dropped. My hands went ice cold. I was standing in my own apartment, my sanctuary, and I wasn't alone. I was trapped inside with a family of bears, and they had just noticed me. The mother bear lifted her head from the fridge. Her wet, black nose twitched. Her golden brown eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, a frantic drumbeat that refused to slow down. Then she let out a low, warning growl, a sound that told me in no uncertain terms that I was in her space now. I had nowhere to go, no weapon, no plan, nothing but the realization that this situation could go very, very wrong. I took the smallest step back, barely breathing, trying not to make any sudden movements. But the floor creaked under my weight, and that's when she started moving toward me. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The mother bear took a step forward, her massive paws thudding against the floor. The cubs, still busy knocking things over, paid no attention. But she did. Her golden eyes locked onto mine, and I felt something primal, something ancient. This was her space now, and I was the intruder. The dim glow from the open fridge cast long shadows across the kitchen, stretching her hulking form even larger. The cold air from inside poured out, mixing with the thick musk of wild animal. The scent was overwhelming, dirt, fur, and something rotten. My body screamed at me to run. My brain told me not to move a muscle. I swallowed hard. If I turned my back, she might lunge. If I stood still, she might see me as weak prey. Every option felt like the wrong one. Then the cub on my dining table made a mistake. It knocked over a plate, sending it crashing to the floor. The sharp sound sliced through the heavy silence. The mother bear's head snapped toward the noise, her ears perking. And then, she turned back to me. A growl rumbled from deep in her chest. Not a roar, not a scream, just a slow, warning vibration that filled the entire apartment. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. Asterisk, don't move. Don't make this worse. Asterisk. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab something, anything, and defend myself. But against a full-grown bear, there was nothing in this apartment that could save me. Slowly, painfully, I shifted my weight back. One step. The floor creaked under me. Her head twitched. Her growl deepened. I froze again. The cubs continued their rampage, one of them tipping over my coffee mug, another dragging a bag of bread onto the floor. They weren't scared. To them, this was an adventure. But their mother was different. She wasn't playing. She was watching me, deciding if I was a problem. My phone. It was still in my pocket. If I could call someone, anyone, maybe I had a chance. Carefully, I slid my hand down, reaching for it. My fingers brushed against the cool screen. I took another slow step back. The phone slipped into my palm. Then, as if sensing the shift, the bear took another step forward. She was testing me. The moment stretched endless. Her breath was loud, heavy, filling the space between us. And then, the fridge motor hummed back to life. The sudden noise made the bear's ears twitch. She huffed and turned her head slightly, distracted for half a second. I took my chance. I ripped the phone from my pocket and hit emergency dial. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The call connected. 911, what's your emergency? I didn't get a chance to answer, because at that exact moment, the bear let out the deepest, most guttural sound I had ever heard. A growl that made my bones feel like jelly. A sound that told me very clearly I was out of time. I was trapped. The bear took another step forward, and suddenly, every muscle in my body locked up. She wasn't running at me, not yet, but she was making it very clear. There was no way out. I glanced toward the door. No chance. She was standing right between me and my only safe exit. Windows, second floor. A drop like that wouldn't kill me, but it sure as hell wouldn't feel good either. I needed a weapon. Something, anything. But what? A frying pan? A chair? I was grasping at straws, my brain throwing out desperate, useless ideas while my body refused to move. Then came the crash. One of the cubs had climbed onto my kitchen counter, sending a pile of dishes shattering onto the floor. The loud noise startled me, but worse, it startled the mother. Her head snapped toward the sound, her ears twitching, and that's when I saw it. The briefest hesitation. She was distracted, just for a second. But sometimes a second is all you get. I moved, fast. I lunged toward the nearest piece of furniture, a bar stool by the counter, and grabbed it, swinging it in front of me like a shield. Not a great weapon, but it was better than nothing. The movement caught the bear's attention immediately. Her head turned back to me, and for the first time, I saw her mouth part just enough to reveal her massive teeth. Shit. The cubs, oblivious to the tension, continued their chaotic rampage. One of them had managed to knock over my coffee maker, spilling liquid across the counter. The other was pawing at a bag of flour, sending white powder into the air like a twisted version of a snowstorm. I stepped back. The floor creaked under my weight. The bear's muscles tensed. This was bad. This was so bad. And then, my phone. The emergency operator was still on the line. A distorted, robotic voice crackled through the speaker. "Hello? Sir, are you there?" The bear's ears twitched. Then she growled. Loud, angry, the kind of sound that makes every hair on your body stand up straight. She was done warning me. I made a choice. A bad one, but I made it fast. I turned and sprinted for the window. Heavy footsteps pounded behind me. I didn't have to look. I knew she was coming. I reached the window and yanked it open, cold night air rushing inside. My apartment was only on the second floor, but from up here the ground felt miles away. The bear was closing in. I gritted my teeth, bracing myself to jump, and then I hesitated. A single, stupid thought crossed my mind. What if I don't make it? That split second of doubt nearly cost me everything. A massive paw slammed into my back. Not claws, just force. But that force sent me flying forward, my ribs smashing against the window frame. Pain exploded through my side. Then I was falling. Pain exploded through my side as I hit the ground. It wasn't a clean landing. I crashed into a bush, branches scraping against my arms, before rolling onto the hard pavement. For a second, I just lay there, gasping, trying to process if I was still in one piece. Then the pain caught up. My ribs were on fire, my back throbbed, and my right ankle sent sharp signals of protest when I tried to move it. But I was alive, barely. Above me, the open window loomed. I half expected the bear to appear there, glaring down at me like some kind of monster out of a nightmare. But she didn't. Instead, I heard the sounds of destruction continuing inside. Crashing, scraping, the unmistakable sound of my fridge being torn apart. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it. The emergency call was still connected. "Sir, are you there?" The voice on the other end was sharp, impatient. I sucked in a breath and forced myself to talk. "You have to send someone. Now. What is your emergency?" "There's a bear. In my apartment." Silence. Then a skeptical, almost amused, "Excuse me?" I clenched my teeth. A fucking bear. A mother bear and her cubs broke into my apartment, and she just threw me out the damn window. More silence. Then, in a tone that suggested they thought I was either drunk or insane, "Sir, have you been drinking tonight?" I almost screamed. "No. Look, I need animal control or the police or whoever the hell deals with this. My place is being torn apart, and I barely made it out alive." A pause. Then, finally, the operator's tone shifted. "Okay, sir, stay on the line. I'm dispatching officers and wildlife control to your location." I let out a shaky breath. Good. I pressed my hand against my ribs. Bruised, probably cracked. Great. I was lying on the cold pavement, hurting all over, and my home was currently occupied by a family of bears. And the question hit me hard. Why me? Of all the apartments, of all the buildings, why the hell did they pick mine? What had I done to deserve this? I wasn't some idiot who left food outside or fed wild animals for fun. I kept my place clean. I didn't even own a pet. So why was my life the one being turned into a horror movie? The sound of glass breaking snapped me out of it. I looked up, just in time to see the glow of my fridge light flickering in the night. Something metal clattered to the floor inside. The bear was still in there, still tearing through everything. I groaned, forcing myself to sit up. My entire body protested. Across the parking lot, a couple of my neighbors had come outside, drawn by the noise. They were staring up at my window, whispering to each other. One of them, a guy in a hoodie, turned to me. "Dude, what the hell is going on?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." And then, from inside my apartment, came the loudest crash yet. Something huge, something heavy. The bear wasn't just looking for food anymore. She was wrecking the place. I sat on the cold pavement, my ribs throbbing, my head spinning. The dispatcher had told me to wait, but that was easy for them to say. They weren't the ones with a bear tearing their home apart. The noise from my apartment was getting worse. Glass breaking, furniture scraping, the unmistakable sound of something heavy being knocked over. The mother bear wasn't just searching for food anymore. She was making a mess, staking her claim. And the cubs? They were still playing. I could see their little shadows bouncing around through the flickering light of my fridge. One of them knocked over what sounded like a chair. The other had started pawing at my couch, climbing onto it like a jungle gym. I clenched my jaw. If I had stayed in there even a second longer, they would have been climbing on me. A door slammed somewhere nearby, and I turned to see more neighbors stepping outside. A few had their phones out, probably filming, because that's what people do these days. No one was coming closer. They were just watching, whispering to each other, probably placing bets on how much damage the bear would do before help arrived. I could still hear the dispatcher in my ear. "Sir, officers are en route. Please remain at a safe distance." Safe distance, right? I wanted to scream. Instead, I sucked in a sharp breath and forced myself to my feet. My ankle screamed in protest, but I ignored it. I had bigger problems, because at that exact moment, the bear let out another growl. Louder this time, more aggressive, and then a sudden heavy thump. I looked up just in time to see my bedroom curtain get yanked clean off the rod. One of the cubs had climbed onto the windowsill, dangling halfway out. For half a second, I thought the little idiot was going to fall. But then, somehow it scrambled back inside. The mother bear did not like that. She let out a low, guttural roar, and I swore I felt the vibrations in my bones. Then movement. I wasn't sure what happened first. The sound of something crashing, the flickering fridge light finally going out, or the mother bear's silhouette moving toward the window. But in that moment, One thought shot through my brain like lightning. She's coming out. Adrenaline kicked in. I turned and ran. Not far, just enough to put some space between me and the building. My ankle was screaming. My ribs felt like they were about to snap in half, but I didn't care. My survival instincts had taken over. Then, from behind me, another crash. Louder, and then silence. I turned, heart hammering. My apartment window was wide open, curtains torn, shadows shifting inside. But the bear wasn't coming out. Not yet. Maybe she was reconsidering. Maybe she was still focused on destroying everything I owned. Or maybe my phone vibrated in my hand, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Sir, officers are arriving now," the dispatcher said. "Stay where you are." I glanced down the street. Flashing red and blue lights cut through the night. A police cruiser turned the corner, tires screeching. Finally, but as relief started to creep in, another noise from my apartment sent chills down my spine. A growl, deep, angry, and then a single deliberate step toward the window. The moment stretched, frozen in time. The mother bear stood at the window, her dark silhouette framed against the night. Her heavy breath misted in the cold air, her muscles tensed, eyes locked onto something unseen. Maybe me, maybe just the chaos she'd created inside. But I knew one thing. She wasn't leaving. Not yet. Then I heard the sirens. Flashing red and blue lights reflected off the buildings, cutting through the dark like salvation itself. A police cruiser screeched to a stop at the curb, and two officers jumped out, hands hovering near their holsters. Behind them, a second vehicle rolled in wildlife control. Finally, one of the officers spotted me, wide-eyed and limping in the street. "You okay?" he called out. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, the bear moved. Not back inside, forward. Her massive front paws landed on the windowsill, claws digging into the frame. For a second, she just stood there, head tilting slightly as if considering her next move. And then she pushed herself up. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was climbing out. Shit, shit, shit. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing. The officers saw her too, one of them reaching for his radio, barking something I didn't catch. The lead officer lifted a hand toward me. "Sir, get back." No argument there. I turned and ran. Pain shot through my ankle, but adrenaline drowned it out. I didn't care about my ribs or my back, or the way my lungs burned from the cold air. All I cared about was getting away. Behind me, I heard shouting. A loud horn blared. A deep, guttural growl followed. A sound so primal it sent chills down my spine. The bear was out. People were screaming. Someone shouted, "Oh my God!" A car door slammed. My brain registered everything in flashes. Neighbors standing on their porches, some running, others frozen in shock. Phones pointed at the chaos. Lights flickering on in windows. Then, a gunshot, not at the bear. A warning shot, fired into the air. The sound cracked through the night like a whip, and for the first time, the bear hesitated. Her head jerked toward the noise, nostrils flaring. The officers didn't want to shoot her. That much was obvious. They were yelling, trying to scare her back, waving their arms. But she wasn't running. She was standing her ground. I kept moving, barely noticing where my feet were taking me. Then suddenly arms caught me, someone steadying me. It was my neighbor, an older guy I barely knew, his face pale under the streetlights. "Jesus, kid," he muttered, gripping my arm. What the hell happened up there? I couldn't answer, couldn't think, could only watch as the officers and wildlife control tried to push the bear back, tried to contain the situation. More sirens in the distance, more flashing lights, more shouting. But all I could think was, how the hell did this even happen? The chaos outside had reached a boiling point. More police cars pulled up, red and blue lights painting the buildings in a constant, dizzying flash. Wildlife control officers stepped out, armed with tranquilizer rifles, their faces tense. The bear was still there, standing her ground, nostrils flaring, eyes darting between the growing crowd and her cubs still inside the apartment. She wasn't just defending herself. She was defending them. One of the officers, a guy in a heavy vest marked Wildlife Response, raised a megaphone. His voice boomed through the night. "Back away. Everyone, stay back." Some people listened. Others didn't. Phones stayed up, recording, capturing every second of the madness. A few idiots even tried to get closer. I stood there, caught in some surreal nightmare, my body aching, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't normal. Then the first tranquilizer dart hit. The bear let out a deep, furious growl, shaking her massive head as if trying to shake off the sting. She took a staggering step back toward my building. Her body tensed. For a second, I thought she was going to charge. Another dart hit. She roared this time, a sound that sent a ripple of silence through the crowd. Even the cops hesitated. But then something changed. Her growl weakened. Her legs wobbled. The drugs were kicking in. She tried to stay upright, to fight it, but her body was betraying her. She swayed, took one last, defiant step forward, and collapsed. Silence. Even the people filming lowered their phones, the reality of the situation sinking in. A few officers rushed forward cautiously, rifles still raised. One of the wildlife guys knelt next to the bear, checking her pulse, muttering something into his radio. "She's out," he called, standing up. "Let's move the cubs." The moment felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened with some kind of unspoken weight. The team moved into my apartment. I could hear the muffled sounds of movement, the scurrying of tiny paws, a few soft whimpers. Minutes later, the two cubs were carried out in thick, protective gear, confused and frightened but unharmed. They were placed into a transport cage in the back of one of the wildlife trucks. And just like that, it was over. Or at least the worst part was, I stood there watching them load the mother bear onto a stretcher. She was breathing, alive. They weren't going to kill her, just relocate her, somewhere far from here. "Sir," a voice snapped me out of it. A cop, the same one who had told me to run earlier. "You need medical attention?" he asked, eyeing my torn-up clothes, the way I was leaning slightly to one side. I let out a shaky laugh. "I think I need a new apartment first." The cop didn't laugh. He just nodded. "We're going to need a statement." Of course they did. Behind him, I saw more people arriving. Reporters, news cameras. Great, because that's what I needed. My 15 minutes of fame as the guy who got his place wrecked by a bear family. I took a deep breath. The weight of everything pressed down on me. The destruction, the fear, the absurdity of it all. My life had just changed forever, and I wasn't sure if I was ever going to feel safe in my own home again. A few days had passed, but it still didn't feel real. My apartment was a wreck. The landlord took one look at the damage and told me, flat out, that I couldn't stay. The floor was scratched to hell. The couch was shredded. The fridge door barely hung on its hinges. And the smell, God, the smell, like dirt, fur, and something worse that I didn't want to think about. Insurance was a nightmare. Wild animal intrusion wasn't exactly a standard clause, and the adjuster sounded just as bewildered as I felt. So, I packed what little I could salvage and crashed at a friend's place. But no matter where I went, the story followed me. I was all over the news. Man survives bear home invasion. Wild bear family takes over apartment. Must see video. There were clips of me standing in the street, looking shell-shocked, police lights flashing behind me. Interview requests flooded my inbox. People wanted to know every detail, what it felt like, what I was thinking, whether I'd ever go back. But the only question I cared about was the one no one could answer. Why did this happen? And then, one morning, I found out what happened to the bear. I was scrolling through my phone, ignoring another email from some talk show, when I saw it. A wildlife update from the local news. The bear, my bear, had been released back into the wild. The footage was shaky, taken from a distance, but clear enough. She walked through the forest, slow but steady, her cubs trailing close behind. She glanced back once, just for a moment, and then disappeared into the trees. She hadn't been killed, She hadn't been locked up in some zoo. She was free. For the first time since that night, I exhaled. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't some rabid beast out for blood. She was just a mother looking for food, trying to keep her cubs alive. And in a way, I was the one who had intruded on her world. I didn't have answers. I didn't know if I ever would. But watching her walk away, I realized something. Maybe I didn't need them.